Absolutely.
And it can be implemented. Need for awareness. Now, without further ado, our next speaker, usually a 1-2, both have helped another government in crisis, namely Malaysia, in the late 90s, I think.
1997-8.
Yeah, Mahathir's government. We've got Mohammed Rafeeq. He is a banking consultant and prolific internet radio broadcaster. Talks money inside out. He knows the game, knows what's going on, and he's an expert of the city of London. Without further ado, over to you, Mohammed.
Good evening, peace be upon you all and together, and to those who aren't with us today as well. It's a communal thing that started off very nicely with Peter. I would like to say something very important as my first statement, and that is that, you know, myself and David and other people around this table I recognise have walked these floorboards for decades, you know, on the money reform. And certainly, even as recently as 10 years ago, it was a fairly lonely game, in that this room would have been the number of people expressing an interest, and once we went outside of these four walls, you wouldn't have found that many people really into the subject. But this economic crisis has had one very positive element to it, which is it's driven tens and hundreds of millions of people around the world onto the internet looking for answers. There are people who've read some of the documents which David's raised. The deficit made me do it. I remember when we were doing this on hand printing presses up in Cellars in Yorkshire, and going out handing them out at conference at Liberal Plaid Cymru and the, you know, Scottish Plaid with money, absolutely all over the place, and it was very slow going. Now there are so many people who are aware of central issues like the creation of money, like the fraud behind floating exchange rates. So we've got a lot more people on board, and there is a spiritual synergy which is occurring as a result of that. We've hit some kind of a critical mass which has got a lot of people on the other side very worried. They're aware that this game is extremely exposed. It's not just a small section of society, but it's people all around the world. Among the people that I currently am consulting to at very high levels inside the Chinese government. We also did a lot of work, I did specifically with Professor Erbakan at the time he had the coalition government in Turkey with Tansal Çiller. And I've explained what happened on the radio, on the internet radio, on several programs, and I'll tell you what happened. We actually, through this coalition government, we're in a position to be able to change the laws and regulations of the Central Bank of Turkey. They brought them round to my house secretly. We had a lot of clandestine meetings for obvious reasons. It was very politically explosive stuff at that time. And we redrafted them, and we came up with methods for actually spending the Turkish lira into supply rather than putting it into supplies of debt. And someone had obviously been listening, the walls have ears, and the right-hand man is a good friend of mine and David's, called Meta, came to visit me in London. He said, we've got a major problem. I said, what's that? He said, we've just discovered that 90% of the generals of the Turkish army are from a particular Alawi sect in the southeast corner, because 27 out of 30 of them have just marched into his office and told him that if he goes ahead with this plan, they guarantee him a military coup and they will overthrow his government. So we're talking about weapons. This stuff is enforced by militaries. The British created the Central Bank of Turkey as it pulled out, as it did lots of places around the world. We created the central banks, and then we told the people in those countries that we will decide the value of their currency in London. And that's the fraud which is called foreign exchange. We created more than 80 central banks around the world, whether it was the Nigerian pound or the Turkish lira, the Sudanese pound, wherever. And we've set that price ever since then. And I wrote an article, I think it was 1994, in response to something in The Economist about the Turkish lira, when the Refah party actually had a landslide in the local elections. and the Turkish lira dropped by 30% in a single day, and 10% over the next 2 to 3 days. So 40% have been written off the value of the currency because people in the City of London disapproved of the way that the Turkish electorate was voting. That's the system that we actually left in place. There is no excuse for floating exchange rates anywhere in the world. We talk about poverty. I've put this forward as a very simple solution. We can end poverty around the world, as David says, in 72 hours. One simple thing is end floating exchange rates. Yeah. What every country in the world has to do is very simple. They all establish a minimum wage or a minimum income, as Ken Palmerton would rather me say. We all establish a minimum income, and that minimum income then becomes the basis for the rate of conversion between currencies. And then overnight, every single person on this planet will have equal purchasing power at the minimum. It's that simple. It doesn't matter if you're living in Chad. It doesn't matter if you're living in Siberia. Your minimum income will buy you the same as the minimum income does in the United States, in the United Kingdom, anywhere in Europe or anywhere in the world. And we don't have to have slave labour. That's just one of the things that can be put in place as a measure. Coming back to this issue of interest in the Bank of England, there are things that can be changed there. I'm aware of one reform group that's putting forward the Bank of England Act. Sadly, a lot of people don't realise the Bank of England, if you go to Companies House, there's no records there for the company of the Bank of England, governor and company. The reason for that is it's actually incorporated by Royal Charter. So it doesn't need to file records at Companies House. It's actually, and that was actually classified intelligence until 1996. And I would also point out, because David can verify this, under the standing orders of the House of Commons, it was not permitted for members of the House to discuss the incorporation of the Bank of England or the national debt. It was only when we signed Maastricht and we ended up moving into the European System of Central Banks, the ESCB, that it became declassified. But it was actually under intelligence provisos, and when any member of Parliament, and we've got copies of the questions they'd asked during question time, will the Right Honourable member of the House please tell us about this, about the national debt, or why is the Bank of England incorporated that way? The Speaker on Hansard interrupts and said, I would point you to the standing orders of this House. It was off limits. Once they got it in, they stopped us being even able to have our elected representatives debate it. Now those laws have changed. The quantitative easing that we've been mocked for decades, create money out of thin air and spend it into supply. We didn't say spend it into supply by handing it over to the banks, which is sadly what they've done, which just goes to prove that they can do it when it suits them. And it suits them when their friends in the banks were short of a few quid. Money, incidentally, which has gone good after bad, it's a very old adage, don't throw good money after bad. So much good money from the real economy has been diverted into supporting these banks. And that money can't be repaid. And we've got the second stage of this crash around the corner, in that the banks and the corporates and the central banks will all be vying for the same money pool. If you want to know what happened to the money, I'll give you a very simple example. We gave, say, I think it's the best part of about £120 billion to the Royal Bank of Scotland in total through various measures. They then go out and invest that in various things to maintain their solvency ratios, as they're called. The things they bought drop in value. They've lost value. So we gave them 120 billion, it's now worth 50 to 60 billion. So they've got to make 50 to 60 billion with half the amount of money that they started with in the first place to actually just pay us back. They've destroyed money that was given to them. Why are bankers privileged and not told when you